welcome to Inside the Birds pregame show. I'm Geoff Mosher alongside my co-host Adam Caplan, and joining us to break down this Week 7 Eagles game against the New York Giants at MetLife Stadium is Greg Cosell. The Eagles are 3-2 after a 20-16 win last Sunday against the Browns. The Giants are 2-4 coming off a 17-7 home loss to the Bengals. Greg, Adam and I were recently talking about this matchup and really not being a question as to which team has the most overall talent. And yet we both kind of agreed this was a difficult game to just get your finger on the pulse of. And I know that you're more of a tape observation guy than a big picture vibes guy, but
I'll agree with you.
I'm sure you have similar sentiments
Yeah.
sometimes like this.
I mean, first of all, because of the way the Eagles have played this year, I think there's uncertainty as to what they are after 5 games.
Mhm.
Obviously the tape tells you what's happened, but we don't know in a sense where they're going. I'm sure a lot of people thought they'd be better than they are now, but they're almost a week-to-week team at this moment in time. I feel that way anyway. I'm not certain what I'm going to see on Sunday at 1 o'clock.
Right.
The Giants are somewhat similar. They've had some really good moments. Malik Neighbors, now that he's back this week, has been targeted a ridiculous amount, has obviously played exceptionally well. I think the Giant defense overall has been pretty solid, but offensively, they're somewhat like the Eagles. You're really not exactly sure what you're going to get.
I think that's really fair. And Adam, we talked about that on the podcast. You just don't know which teams show up, and all you can know is the teams have strengths on certain sides of the ball. And what the matchup, Adam, that I really like is that the Eagles' most talented side of the ball is offense, even if it hasn't yet manifested. The Giants clearly have their bulk of their talent on defense, and that makes for a good matchup.
It does. Now, the question, and we'll get into this, is can the Eagles protect with Fred Johnson, as we expect to start for Jordan Mailata? I mean, Fred started early at right tackle against the Bucs. We know he had to fill in for Mailata before, but the bottom line is now you take away Kelsey. We have to talk about that. Kelsey obviously had many years playing against the Giants. Now it's Cam Jurgens. We talked about some of the struggles with core strength with him. You got that issue. You got no Goddard, who's very effective in the run and pass game. So as much talent as the Eagles have on offense, Geoff, now you've got things evening out a little bit. This is going to be interesting.
And right. Geoff, just to play off what Adam said, what I found really interesting about the Eagles in their last game against Cleveland is even though Goddard went out after 3 plays, they played a boatload of 12 personnel. Now, what does that say, that they're totally uncomfortable with their third wide receiver? Or, again, we don't know the reasons behind it. We can only speculate, but I was kind of surprised by that because they ended up playing, I think Calcaterra, who, by the way, I like a lot, played over 50 snaps. And I think Jack Stoll played like 35, something like that. I don't have the number right in front of me, but I know it was 50 plus for Calcaterra and 30 plus for Stoll. So I wonder if that's what we'll see, or if this is a different game and a different matchup. And that's what you don't know yet.
That's a good question, Greg. My thought on that, because I had similar thoughts after watching the tape, was that, we talk about this all the time. You have a game plan for the week, right? You prepare for it all week. And my thinking was how much they ran the ball, that was their core philosophy, at least to start off the game in 12 personnel. Right. And Goddard going out so early, it would have been tough to just rip up everything like they went through. All week long. So they kind of went there until the second half when they started to open up a little more.
Right. And you could well be right. You could well be right. And then have to decide, and we'll talk about it, how they feel they can play best against the Giants.
Right. All right. Well, you guys have already started off and mentioned it. Both of these teams have some significant injuries, and yet also both of these teams are going to wind up getting players that they were worried about earlier in the week. They will be on the field. So let's start with the Eagles. Adam, you said it. Left tackle Jordan Mailata out for a few weeks now. He's on IR.
Actually, 4 games now. Yeah.
Yes, at least 4 games, right? Yeah. On IR with the hamstring injury. Dallas Goedert also out. He's dealing with the hamstring injury that we just talked about last week against the Browns. So Fred Johnson takes over at left tackle. And we're going to see a committee here at tight end, I imagine. There'll be some Jack Stoll. There'll be some Grant Calcaterra taking over.
Yeah. Look, we saw this actually. God, I can't believe this. We saw this 2 years ago during the Super Bowl run. You might remember that game against the Colts where they where Shane Steichen, ironically, would become the Colts head coach later on. But when Steichen was calling the plays, they found a way to get Calcaterra and Stoll productive. Jack is the Y, Calcaterra is the move tight end. They'll do that again. They'll dress a third tight end. They'll be okay there, but you just don't have Goddard. But Greg just talked about it. Calcaterra is pretty fluid. He had a really good offseason, Geoff. I mean, look, he clearly earned the number 2 job. And the crazy thing was, I mean, you and I talked about this when CJ Uzomah signed. We're like, oh, he's going to be the backup tight end. Well, it never happened.
Yeah.
Yes, Calcaterra was good, but Uzomah, Geoff, and this rarely happens when you bring a veteran in, he struggled so badly. He was cut well before the 53. He was cut for the final preseason game. That was bizarre, and then they just brought him back.
There you go. So, yeah, Calcaterra, as Greg mentioned, made some plays against the Browns, and he'll continue to get some run there and see if he can contribute in the passing game. The Eagles did get good news this week. First of all, Darius Slay is listed as questionable. He was in practice, then he was out of practice, but he did say he's fine and he's expecting to play. So that is good news for them. He got banged up in the Browns game and had to come out. And Jalen Carter, I know all the fingers were crossed inside the NovaCare complex as he did not practice on Thursday after a rough Wednesday practice, but he was back at practice on Friday. He is not carrying an injury designation on the injury report, so he's good to go. So, Adam, that is a big sigh of relief on defense to have Slay and Carter expected to play.
Yeah, and he still has, he did ding his shoulder. It's listed it's still listed on the injury report, but he doesn't have a game status designation, which means he's fully expected to play. Now, as you pointed out to me, and I totally forgot about this, they did practice in pads Wednesday, and this is a really good point you made. Well, if Slay had an injury where he couldn't finish the game, why would you have him practice on Wednesday and in pads? That to me was a little surprising. Then they backed off Thursday. He didn't work. And then he took all his reps Friday, which means he's barring some sort of unforeseen setback. He'll be in the lineup. But yeah, now look, they are banged up. These guys are going to play. Now, how effective they're going to be, that's the question as you head into the game.
Right. And of course, among the backups, Byron Young and Eli Ricks were listed as questionable, popping up on the injury report. On defense, I'm sorry, as for the Giants, they are also without their left tackle, Andrew Thomas. He underwent Liz Frank surgery. He is out for the rest of the season. You got to give the guy credit because he got hurt in the game and played until the end of the game against the Bengals, but out for the rest of the season, which is a big loss for them. He is an all-pro left tackle. And they're also, the Giants, without their defensive end, Kayvon Thibodeau. He's on IR with a wrist injury. They'll be without cornerback Adoree Jackson with a neck, and without their punter, because whenever the Eagles play the Giants, there has to be a special teams injury. So Jamie Gillen will not be punting for the Giants. What's the guy's name? Hack? Or is it Hawk?
Matt Hawk, spelled Hack, but pronounced Hawk. And I'm pretty certain he's a left-footed punter. So
Nice.
this is, which would mean back-to-back weeks of the left-footed punter. But Devin Singletary's back at running back, but I am very fascinated to see and Brian Daboll, the head coach, talk about it Friday. Tracy's played himself into a role here. I'm interested to see what they do here going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Also, Josh Azudu, it looks like he'll get the nod at left tackle in place of Andrew Thomas. We'll get to him in a second with Greg. And Azeez Ojulari takes Kayvon Thibodeau's spot, I believe, Greg, in the pass rush. He had 2 sacks last week, and I know
He played over 80% of the snaps last week.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so you may not, and listen, you want to have everybody at your disposal, and you'd love to put all your pass rushers on the field at one time, but not exactly the biggest miss of a high player for Thibodeau to be out, but Ojulari to get more snaps because Ojulari can play.
He can. He was a pretty high draft choice. I mean, was expected to be a quality NFL player. So he played he played a lot opposite Brian Burns.
Now tell us about Josh Azudu. I mean, this is a guy that the Giants have hoped to keep healthy and get in the lineup for a couple of years. It just hasn't happened, but Adam has talked about him being more of a guard right tackle type player, but he's going to have to play left.
Come out because
this is his 3rd year, Azudu's 3rd year, and he unfortunately has had 2 major injuries. But
2022 draft.
Yep, 3rd rounder at UNC.
Yeah, because I really liked him a lot coming out.
I remember that.
And I thought, again, but he's been injured a lot, and you never know the toll that those kinds of injuries take. But I really liked him watching him in North Carolina. Pulling up my notes, I said he's an intriguing prospect given his desirable combination of size and movement and his extensive experience playing both guard and left tackle. There's no question he possesses the physical traits and athleticism to develop into a quality starter. at the next level, with my sense being that he will likely be viewed as an offensive guard and not as a tackle, although his experience playing outside and the fact that he played it well will help him tremendously. Now, obviously, there's more, but I
Sure.
basically thought that he was a guard,
Mhm.
but
Yep.
he did play tackle in college, and he does have tackle traits. I mean, he's over 6'4". He's probably 310, 315. He's got long arms. He has the traits to line up and play tackle.
All right, we'll get into some strategy involved there with them being on Izudu at left tackle when we do the offense versus defense, finishing off the injuries for the Giants, and they sort of dodged a bullet like the Eagles did with Slay and with Jalen Carter because their two best players on defense, their best pass rushers, Brian Burns and Dexter Lawrence. They did not practice Friday, but they are both listed as questionable, both expected to play.
They
Burns
worked.
doing
They
I'm
worked.
sorry, they did practice Friday. Yeah, they missed practice earlier in the week, I believe.
Yes,
What I
correct.
meant to
Both,
say.
in fact, yeah, Wednesday and Thursday. Yeah, but no, they got some work and they're expected to go.
All right, so they're expected to go, and that is obviously a big piece to the Giants' defense, which has been pretty good this year. Other special teams news: Greg Joseph will continue to handle kicking duties in place of an injured Graham Gano, and Amir Smith-Marset will return punts for injured Gunnar Olszewski. So that is the injury situation facing both teams. Let's turn the tables right here. Let's get to the main matchup, at least what we would think of this game, which is the Eagles' offense against the Giants defense. The Eagles offense, despite all their weaponry, they're only 18th in scoring at 21.1 points per game. They have struggled on third down, where they rank 18th. They have struggled in the red zone, where they are 25th. Adam, they did, however, see a return of some explosive plays last week against the Browns, who have a good defense, thanks to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith getting back onto the field. You would imagine that these guys, once again, have to, especially now without Dallas Goedert, have to really answer here. The offense has to go through these two guys.
Yeah, and also, I'll be interested to see what their foundation in this game is. With Barkley, it didn't happen last week. Greg outlined this for us that he just didn't have anywhere to run. So how do they come out playing this game? Are they going to come out running? Are they going to come out throwing? Don't have Goddard. Although he made a couple really nice plays, Jahan Dotson, we know how little of a factor he's been. So that does worry me in the red zone in particular, not having that physical presence other than A.J. Brown, because that's where you like to have Goddard. Calcaterra is a really good athlete on how physical he is. So this won't be easy. And I think it's the nickel corner for the Giants. I believe it's Drew Phillips, Greg, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So I'll be interested to see if they go after him at all.
Oh, you got two rookie nickels playing in this game. Drew Phillips for them, and
The
for the
interesting thing is that Jackson played outside in place of Flott in the nickel, and he's not up this week, as you said, Geoff. So we'll see if it's Flott who stays outside, but Jackson would come and play outside in the nickel, particularly on third downs and in those situations. So he's not there this week.
Greg, the Giants have been working under a new defensive coordinator. Shane Bowen came over from Tennessee. So far, the results are very good. They are a top
Very good
defense, 5th in the red zone, 11th on third down. But what really sticks out, number 1 in the NFL as far as sacks per pass attempt. What is it that Shane Bowen and the Giants are doing to be so potent against quarterbacks?
Well, Shane Bowen came from Tennessee, and I've talked to him over the years. And he's really good with pressure concepts, both with 5-man pressure concepts and with what we call 4-man zone exchange concepts, or sim pressures. He's very good with both of those. And so the Giants have been good in that regard, but they also have some very good pass rushers that can win one-on-one. I mean, Brian Burns can win one-on-one. We know Dexter Lawrence can win one-on-one, and there have been snaps this year where Lawrence has just driven back interior offensive linemen into the lap of the quarterback, where he's looked like he's been playing against high school kids. So they can win one-on-one. So can Ojulari, by the way. Ojulari can win one-on-one. So they can rush the quarterback both schematically and one-on-one, and that's the situation you want to be in as a D coordinator, obviously. But he is very good with his pressure concepts, particularly overload concepts. And, we've spent a lot of time talking about Barkley in pass protection. He's going to have to protect in this game. There are going to be plays in this game where he is going to have to understand the front and understand who he has to go protect and go get him and not
Yes.
be late.
Yeah, and that it's not just last week. I think even in the game before that, there were a couple of pass pro opportunities that
Right.
he wasn't crisp on. We have talked about that. This is a big game, Adam, for Barkley because he's going back to MetLife Stadium, going to play against the team that drafted him, where he had a lot of success. Emotions will be big for him, but really, I'm curious on your feeling. You wanted the Eagles to throw the ball a little bit more against the depleted Browns secondary last week, but they clearly had a mission about trying to keep it on the ground and stabilize their offense. They didn't necessarily get great results. They
No.
didn't get good results in the run game. They got better results at times in the pass game as far as explosive plays. What's the formula against the Giants? Throw the ball?
Well, Cordell Flott's the guy that I know, talking to other teams, that you want to go after. I'm stunned that he's starting on the outside. That's not really what I thought would be happening, but that's who they have. Joey Jackson's an older player, as you mentioned. He's out, so they don't have much of a choice. So that's a guy I'd like to go after if they could protect. But man, with Barkley healthy, looking great, again, Greg outlined that they just did not have the holes to run through. I still think you got to start there, because I remember, guys, when we did our first show this season, we were wondering, what would the foundation be? Will it be this two great receivers and Goddard? But they now have this elite running back, and Saquon has been so good for the most part. It's not like you don't have to run the ball 30 times. That doesn't mean that's a foundation. It's just, what are you trying to do early in the game where they're not scoring, Geoff? That's the thing. But when they throw it, I want to go after Cordell Flott. That to me is a
Well,
guy
and
that,
it's funny you say that, because one thing I saw last week against the Bengals,
yeah.
and they didn't do it, obviously on every third down, but I mean, it was part of their approach. It was the first third down of the game. It was 3rd and 6. They doubled both Chase and Higgins, and they matched up man to man on the other 3 receivers behind a 4-man D-line pass rush. So it would not surprise me if in given situations, third downs, maybe some select situations, that there is a double on Brown. There could be a double on Smith. You can double 2 players if you so choose. So we'll see. I mean, obviously, you do have the Hurts factor as a runner, much more so than Joe Burrow. Although Burrow, actually, last week we saw on that particular play, Burrow ran 10 yards for a first down, and he did have the 47-yard touchdown run. But they did do that, and so that is part of their playbook, as it were. So we'll see. We'll see how they choose to do. The other thing that a lot of teams do is they pick the one receiver they think is clearly the more dominant receiver, which on the Eagles would probably be Brown, and they could put Flott on him with the idea of doubling him and let Banks be man to man on Smith. Your best corner, who's played a ton of man going back to his college days, and let him match up man to man on Devonta Smith. You could see that as well.
Sure. Greg, one thing with the Eagles offense I wanted to ask you about, just watching them, not just this year, but also last year, how Jekyll and Hyde they can be, even in that Browns game, really struggling to run, struggling to move the ball, but bam, you get 2 or 3 explosive plays. It almost seems like lately that they've become a team that is looking to strike at the right matchup. And when they get it, they hit it and they can be explosive. But when you watch great offenses in the NFL, there have to be times where you see offenses, right, that can adapt to any kind of look, coverage, not all the time, but they're able to work their offense and not just look for the right look at the right time on the right down. I feel like the Eagles right now are really struggling with the fundamental of an offense and are really hitting at the right look at the right time when they need it.
So the question that you're really asking is why?
Yes.
Because every offense would like to be rhythmic and consistent.
Correct.
No offense goes into a game saying it's okay if we're not very good for 50 of our 60 plays as long as we happen to hit the other 10. No one says that.
Do you think that's a fair assessment of what you've seen?
Well, that's the way it plays out. That's not what the goal is.
Of course.
So you're right in the way it plays out, but that's not what Kellen Moore and the offensive staff are doing during the week. They're not saying let's be crappy for 85% of our plays and hope the other 15% are really cool.
Right. Of course.
So yes, I would say that overall there's not a whole lot of rhythm to their offense.
Okay.
I think they've tried to be effective running the ball, which for the most part they have been. But the pass game has not worked off that efficiently enough. So obviously when Brown was out, you know, Jalen did not have his guy and they didn't really get explosive plays. But you're working toward not just explosive plays, but you're working toward rhythmic, sustaining offense, both with the run game and the pass game. That's what you're working toward.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. I mean, it's very easy to look at Brown and go, man, that guy's great. And as we talked earlier in the week, you could make the argument that Brown, he has a special skill on 50-50 balls. There's no question. He may be the best in the league. I mean, he tracks the ball with unbelievable eye coordination. He has a great feel for using his body to shield and control corners. He may be the best in the league at it, but that's not the way you can live in your offense. That's you can't assume that's going to happen every week.
Right. What do you notice about Jalen Hurts' ability to throw outside the numbers, which you predicted he would do against the Browns, because the Browns play a lot of that cover 1, cover 3, right?
And Brown was back.
Right. And Brown being back.
Yeah.
And how would you correlate that to what Bowen does defensively? Does he leave one safety deep a lot? Will he play a lot of cover 1, cover 3? I know everybody plays everything, but is that a backbone for him like it can be for Jim Schwartz?
It is, but I mean, it's not as much as Schwartz. But I mean, the Giants, I think the Giants are relatively multiple in how they play. I don't think that, they necessarily play one thing. So, it'll be interesting. Now, one player on the Giants who I really like, and he's the rookie safety, Tyler Nubin. He's a really good football player.
Yeah.
And he can play on the back end. He's really good reading the quarterback. He's really good playing downhill. He's a really good football player. And but they also use the other safety, Pinnock. He's part of their blitz packages a lot, and he's a really good blitzer.
Greg, one thing when we talk about the Eagles running game and obviously Barkley, you sent us your notes and I was just going through them. The one thing that really stood out to me, and obviously it's, as you always tell us, it's tape-based. You made the comment about Cam Jurgens does not have the power to physically control big DTs.
Yeah.
Well, guess who's coming this week? So how do you help alleviate it? It's not like Jurgens is going to be put on 100 pounds. So what can you do to help him to make sure this does not become a problem? And also, of course, Becton now facing potentially Lawrence inside.
Yeah, well, I mean, now you're trying to structure a run game, which you can do, where you have a lot more angle blocks and leverage blocks, and you can even do that versus a zero technique. You can do that. So that's what you'll be doing this week for sure. There'll be very few plays where Jurgens is going to block one-on-one versus Dexter Lawrence. That's not going to happen very often. It just can't, because he's.
You better hope not.
Right, he's going to get beat.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, in the run game we're talking about, in the pass
Yes.
game, depending on the nature of the drop, you can do a lot of things. If it's a 3-step drop concept or a quick 5, you can do that because he's not going to get there. He could blow up Jurgens and he still won't get to the quarterback. So it depends on what the play concept is.
Right. Someone asked us this on Patreon, so I'll pose it to you, Greg. In the post Aaron Donald era, is Dexter Lawrence the best interior defensive tackle in the league, or interior defensive lineman?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'd have to look at all the teams, but he's certainly right up there. I mean, there's no question. I mean, I'm sure I'm missing somebody. I think Jeffrey Simmons is a really good player.
That's a good one. Vita Vea is a good player.
He had some dominant physical snaps. Simmons did. Trying to think of the other teams. Obviously I can't think of every team right now.
Pretty good list. Yeah, it's pretty good.
No question Lawrence falls into that category for sure.
Rare for a 340-pounder to be able to move the way he does and rush the passer, collapse the pocket. Yeah, fantastic player.
By the way, you know who moves like that? Devondre Sweat, who's also on the team.
Yeah. He's 360 pounds, is he not?
He moves like that.
Wow, that's pretty special.
Yeah.
And he lines up next to Jeffrey Simmons, doesn't he?
I mean, Lawrence has plays in every game where you just go, oh my God, he's one of those guys. Yeah.
So obviously, the last thing that we talk about with this offensive line is left tackle, and you've got Fred Johnson. He has played. Adam and I have noticed that he seems to play all right when he gets thrown into the fire. Sometimes when you start him, you start to see the warts, which is kind of common among backups. But he's going to have his hands full against Brian Burns, one of the best pass rushers in the league also, Greg. How does their What does Bowen do with their front? Does he play a lot of games? Is there going to be a lot of stunts?
They do
Is
stun.
communication going to be
Yes,
big?
they do stun a good amount. Yes. But it's interesting. Just as you said that, one thought immediately popped into my head. It'll be very interesting to see Jalen Hurts in this game, because if he feels that Fred Johnson, can't quite hold up, whether it's Burns or Ojulari, because we know that Jalen does have that tendency to leave the pocket prematurely, you wonder if he just sees an initial flash of color, if he immediately bails to his right, which of course is his strong tendency. So you wonder if that's going to be a factor. And if the Giants will think like that and then be in position when he does bail to his right to defend it, because they'll anticipate that he will do that.
Gee, they didn't anticipate it against Joe Burrow. I can't imagine why.
Right.
Guy had a 47-yard touchdown run, unbelievably. All right, so obviously the big issue here with the Eagles is maybe less the absence of Dallas Goedert in the pass game, but let's say your left tackle Fred Johnson, who's filling in, is struggling. You would love to have a tight end who can really block well to put next to him, chip the pass rusher, and release. Right now, if you have to do that, that's Jack Stoll, and he's never really factored prominently into the Eagles pass game. Or you take your chances with Grant Calcaterra, who can factor in, but you have to hope that the chip block actually works.
Well, you'd love Calcaterra to be a primary route runner as opposed to chip. And, but again, now we're speaking if they're in 12 versus, if they're in 11, then obviously it's going to be Calcaterra, and you'll see. I mean, the game will dictate, you go in with a plan, maybe you go in with a plan and with the idea that, hey, let's see how Fred Johnson does. Let's tailor our pass game so that the ball can come out pretty quick. There's ways to alleviate that or minimize it, and then you see how it plays out. I mean, if all of a sudden after 2 series, Fred Johnson is struggling mightily, then you've practiced plan B. In other words, it's not, oh my God, what do we do? You practiced plan B, but you're hoping you can get 5 out. That's what you're hoping.
Right. Adam, you think there's any chance if there's a struggle that they pull the plug and try to move Becton to left tackle and play Steen at right guard?
They may, knowing how teams do it, they may have gotten Becton a couple snaps there. It's like the Giants, I give Brian Dable credit. He didn't hide it, what their plan was. Zudo is their plan at left tackle. If he struggles, Jermaine Illuminor is going to take snaps at left tackle, and the dreaded Evan Neal, who's not very good, would be at right tackle. And they also signed Chris Hubbard off the Niners practice squad, who's going to be, he'll probably wind up being their top backup right tackle, left tackle, who started at games, both positions. So they've got a problem. So they're going to have a plan. But yeah, it would have to be an absolute disaster. But Greg makes up a good point, and a lot of quarterbacks go through this because they start dropping their odds. They start worrying about the pressure.
You anticipate that you're going to get pressure.
Yes, and that is, I can't tell you how many coaches have told me this when they watch their team's tape and the quarterback's worried about what's going to happen. This guy going to block for me, and he drops his eyes. And by the way, we've seen Jalen do that sometimes.
Oh, yeah, of course, and he does that a good amount.
Yep.
But we'll see. You make a good point about the Giants as well. I think who knows? We might see Jumbo Elliott at left tackle.
Will he be catching a touchdown pass? That's the question.
Yeah.
All right. So listen, we'll as we move away from the offense, I'll just leave you guys with this food for thought. I think that the Eagles have to have a sort of curveball plan. Like, you're down your left tackle, you're struggling offensively, you're on the road, you're playing a good defense. To me, it would be sort of malpractice to be like, well, we're just going to put the reserves in and run what we've been doing already, which hasn't been great. So whether it's quick game, no huddle, more quarterback designed runs, under center, perhaps, we haven't seen that yet. We've talked about it a lot. I just can't imagine that the Eagles are going into this game saying, well, we're better than the Giants, even though we have these injuries, and we're going to figure it out offensively. That's just me. If they do,
I like your no huddle idea, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because I wanted to mention that as well. So I'm glad you did. I would think no huddle would be something they would do selectively in this game.
Right.
The Giants have some pretty good players. There's some players we haven't mentioned. Okereke is a really good linebacker. When they're in there, they basically play 2 nickels. Their normal nickel has McFadden with Okereke, and he's actually a good linebacker. On 3rd down, Simmons comes in the game, and he plays linebacker with Okereke. Now, obviously, Simmons has not become what anybody thought he might become, because this is kind of his role. He basically plays like 12, 13 snaps a game because he plays in third down nickel. But he's a really good athlete. That's what he is. And he'll match up to tight ends when they play man, and he's capable of doing that. But I do want to mention one play that I thought was Hurts's best play last week. Okay, and I think it's worth mentioning because Hurts has obviously had success in this league, so we don't want to act like he can't play. Does he have strengths and does he have limitations? Absolutely, but he hit Calcaterra for 20 yards late in the second quarter. Do you guys happen to remember that play?
On the right side, was it, Greg?
It was basically kind of a seam throw to
Yeah.
Calcaterra.
Yeah.
It was his best read and throw of the game because the Browns disguised their look. They went late rotation to an inverted cover 2 concept
Yes.
behind a 4-man sim pressure. The slot corner Newsome was part of the rush. So it all this made it a post-snap read for Hurts because this is not what they showed pre-snap. So it became a post-snap read. And Hurts immediately knew where to go, and he hit Calcaterra down the seam. He was decisive. He read it. It was his best quarterback play of the game.
Right.
So I mean, he is capable of these things. You just want to see it more often.
Absolutely. And obviously the spotlight will be on him in this game. You know, you've got to come. This is a big division game and it's the Giants. So
there's going to be multiple pressure looks that not only are on him to understand, but it's also on the O-line, on Barkley, it's on everybody to understand.
Absolutely. All right, let's transition to the other side. We sort of have a weakness versus a weakness. The Giants have the NFL's 19th ranked offense, which is actually an improvement for them since last year. They're 21st on third down, 25th in the red zone, but they're only averaging 16 points a game, which is 4th worst in the league. And the Eagles have been better situationally on defense and overall. 12th on third down, 4th in the red zone, but 20th overall and 14th in scoring. We talked this week about the Eagles making some improvements in some areas against the Browns, made some personnel changes. We also said they faced arguably, maybe not arguably, the worst quarterback or the worst offense in the league at the moment. So guys,
you can drop arguably.
Yeah, I figured you'd say that, Greg.
Oh, good.
Normally when we talk about this Eagles-Giants matchup over the last few years, we talk about how hard the Giants, it's going to be for them to block the Eagles front four. And especially now with them being down their starting left tackle. But Adam, I start with you. Like, how much stock do you put into that improvement you saw from either Bryce Huff or Nolan Smith or in general when it came against the Browns?
It's fair, but I do want to say a thing about Huff, and I know Greg said that he did show up a little bit. Our Andrew DeCecco did talk to Bryce after the game. Andrew said, like, during the bye week, he went back and looked at some things he could do better, and that's encouraging. Like that, we'll see. Again, as you said, we'll see if it carries over. The Giants have offensive line issues, so we'll see if they could take advantage of it. But the one thing, Geoff, we have to say this. We talked about this in training camp. We were concerned about the pass rush. I had no idea it would be this bad. So we'll see. I from week to week with this pass rush, I don't know if we know what you're going to get. Let's call it like it is. Like Mauro Jones has been a nice story, but he's not going to play a lot of snaps. So
last week,
well, we know, as you pointed out, that Jordan Davis is not playing nickel.
He does not. Jordan Davis, just to reiterate what we talked about earlier in the week, has not played one snap on 3rd and 6+ yards to go.
Wow.
He's
tells you all you need to know.
Pass rush. Yeah, exactly.
Jomo played something like 37 snaps last week.
That's crazy. It's a good, nice story of development, though, Geoff. You talk about development. That's a good story worth talking about. But the guys that they're paying a lot of money, like Huff, got to produce. And Jalen Carter's got to play better. Like, he's got to be more consistent. Greg, I want to get to him for a second here. We know how talented he is. Let's leave that to the side. What's the tape look like on Jordan Carter so far? Jalen Carter.
Well, there's not a zillion ways to answer that, Adam. He's not played to his talent on a consistent basis. You asked me earlier, Geoff, who's the best defensive tackle in the league now that Aaron Donald is retired. I think a lot of people thought that Jalen Carter would be in that conversation, certainly by his second year in the league. I mean, and he's not in that conversation based on his tape.
Right.
But he has snapshots. He has moments where you go, oh my God, this guy's talent is ridiculous. But he doesn't play that way all the time. And none of us know why. Okay. We can't answer that other than as Adam said, and he's 100% right, the Eagles expected him to be a force inside as a pass rusher who could win one-on-one and then maybe even dictate some double teams so other guys could get one-on-ones. And that's not really happening just yet. Look, Vic Fangio told you all you needed to know last week, because what did he do? He added some five-man pressures, which he doesn't really want to do a whole lot of. He added Cooper DeJean blitzing off the slot with both five-man and sim concepts, which, I don't know whether he wants to do that or not, but, at some point you got to try to get to the quarterback. And if you're not getting there with a straight four-man D-line rush, you've got to do other things.
Right.
And, I think he would like to get there with a straight four-man D-line rush, but that's not been happening.
Yeah, there are times with Jalen Carter, Greg and Adam, where when I'm watching him, I notice that you're right, that he has all these great, amazing, violent, physical tendencies on the field that can make for a really disruptive player, but that maybe the seasoning and the understanding of the game is still
Yes.
new to him. And we talked about being at Georgia, not playing more than maybe 20 to 25 snaps per game. So against the Browns, there was one play that caught my attention at the end of a play, really. You might have not even seen it, Greg, just because it's really not involved with the play, but he tried to jump up with both hands up to block a pass. And if you're wondering why most defensive linemen who are big like that don't jump up and try to block passes, it's because offensive linemen are taught when a defensive lineman does that, you punch them in the stomach and knock the wind out of him.
Right.
So that's what happened to Jalen Carter. The
Right.
left guard saw it, knocked him into the stomach, and he sort of like, the left guard actually helped them up, and they joked about it. But most seasoned, smart defensive tackles know not to put themselves in that.
Well, I think most people knew, we're not going to get into the off-field stuff, but just the football part. I think most people knew as a football player, he needed grove and maturity.
Yes.
All we're talking about is the football player part. Adam, when you say that's a fair statement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact,
Yeah.
that was Greg. He would have been the second pick overall. There's no question.
Right.
It was going to be
But
Carolina.
I'm just talking about on the field. Not
This kid is unbelievably gifted, and if Clint Hurtt could reach him, I mean, I'm with you. I think he could be the best. I mean, I don't know about Lawrence, but he might be number 2.
But it raises your larger question, Geoff, which is, the fact that they've not been able to rush the quarterback with their down 4. And so now you have to find ways to impact the quarterback. Because if a quarterback, look, I'm sure most people listening probably think based on track record that Daniel Jones isn't very good, okay? But the point is, if Daniel Jones has time to sit in the pocket, he throws a beautiful intermediate ball. Now, there's other issues. We can get to those in a second with Jones. But the bottom line is the Eagles did not show through their first 4 games an ability to generate any kind of consistent pressure with their straight 4-man D-line rush. So they had to change that.
Mm-hmm. Well, this will be an interesting test. It'll be an interesting test for Bryce Huff, Nolan Smith, anybody who lines up over left tackle, because I imagine if we all put our Brian Daboll hats on and he's watched the Eagles tape, he's going to want 5 outlets. Like you mentioned, every coach wants 5 outlets. He's going to want to see first if Josh Ezeudu can hold up on his own before he has to adjust and put a tight end there or a running back chipping or a tight end chip. He wants to be able to have everybody out as soon as possible.
And keep one thing in mind. Tyrone Tracy was a high school receiver who went to Iowa as a receiver and caught 39 balls at Iowa as a wide receiver, and then transferred to Purdue where they made him a running back. He's a terrific receiver. So there's no question that when he's in the game, and if it's third down or a passing situation, they're going to want him to be a primary, even if he's just releasing on a swing into they're not going to want him to have to stay in and block.
That's absolutely right. So that'll be a big test here for Bryce. Whoever lines up over Ezeudu, can the Eagles generate a better 4-man rush than they've been able to so far this year? As for skill position players that the Eagles have to defend, Malik Neighbors is back for the Giants. The rookie sensation had 35 catches for 386 yards and 3 touchdowns in his first 4 games. He missed the last 2
targets.
52 targets, Greg. But you know what's amazing about those 52 targets? They came on 144 passes. That is a 36% target share.
That's not good. Jeez.
No, if you're a wide receiver with an 18% target share, you're getting a lot of balls.
That's insane. Well, it's great that he's the man, but man, who else is getting the football? It's crazy. Wow.
No, but I will say this, and I was going to ask Greg about this.
Yeah.
Not having him for 2 weeks and them a bit going on the road and beating Seattle and starting to unlock a little bit of not only Tyrone Tracy, but Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton. You wonder, Greg, if Daniel Jones is starting to get a little more comfortable with other weapons and if he can be a little bit more diversified against this Eagles defense, which hasn't been very tight this year.
No, and look, they had a really nice game in Seattle. I thought that Jones looked really efficient. He obviously hit Slayton quite a bit. But they've been up and down. Obviously, Jones has been up and down. I mean, they've struggled to consistently execute any kind of intermediate passing game. So they've struggled to generate explosive plays. Keep in mind, in 6 games, Jones only has 13 completions of 20+ yards. That's on the lower end of the league. You want more than that. So he's really a function of the passing schematics and the route concepts versus specific coverage, because he's somewhat robotic. So, but he throws a really good intermediate ball. If you can give him time and the route concepts develop and it's clean, he can throw the ball really well. One thing he's always lacked, and it's one reason why I think he struggles in this league, is that he's never quite been able to master the subtle and efficient pocket movement that he needs. Because he's straight line runner, but he hasn't really been able to slide in the pocket, find that quieter place to deliver the football. So that's an area that he's never really been good at. But if he's clean, he throws a nice ball.
We already talked about Andrew Thomas being out. Well, how has Runyon played? How's their offensive line played so far in front of Jones?
Not bad, not bad. I mean, he's been. I'd say Jones has been better this year. And I think he has to continue to grow. Obviously Neighbors is a new player, but he's their number 1 guy. But I think let's put it this way. I think this is a really big game for Jones. And I don't mean this is career defining, but right now, the way the Eagles defense is playing, unless there's a dramatic change, you would think that they'd be able to drop back and throw the football. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to drop back 45 times. He's not.
Right.
But unless the game is out of hand. But he did throw it 40+ times against the Bengals, because the game, although that game was close, it was 10-7 until late in the 4th quarter, and they had him drop back over 40 times.
But the pass pro is good so far.
It's been solid. It hasn't been one of those like in previous years where you go, oh my God, they just can't protect.
Yeah.
Greg, the way they're using Daniel Jones to run the ball in designed ways, coming off an ACL injury, no doubt, and finding success with it is different than what we've seen in the other coaches. We've seen Daniel Jones beat the Eagles on RPOs or zone reads, but now I don't know if this connected. I'm watching the way they're using him, and I'm thinking, oh, Brian Daboll thinks he has maybe like a mini Josh Allen and how he's running Daniel Jones designed up the middle, using that power and explosion.
Yeah, no, he's been using him much more sort of on inside runs as opposed to sweeps.
Yeah.
And they've been effective when they've done it. I mean, Jones is a big kid. But obviously the pass game is the key point here. But I think they would really like to be able to run the ball reasonably effectively. I mean, Tracy's an interesting guy. I really liked him coming out of Purdue. I thought he'd be an ascending player because he didn't have a lot of experience as a back, but he showed really good traits. And Singletary's back, and he's not special, but he's obviously had success in the league, so you can't just write him off. So they've got 2 guys that they probably feel pretty good about in the backfield now. But it's the pass game. But Neighbors is intriguing because he's a man now. When he catches the ball, you better get bodies to him because he is going to run through tackles.
Where are they going to line him up, and who do you think is going to draw him the most? I know the Eagles don't play man all the time, but in general, what side do you expect?
Normally they just play sides because normally Mitchell plays right corner, I believe, and Slay plays left corner, and they're not unless they do something different this week, which you would think not, but Neighbors does line up in multiple spots. So he's not he's not an X and just say, oh, he's an X, he's going to be there. He lines up in multiple spots.
I mean, I would imagine that they're going to have some slot reps in store for Neighbors to try to test him against the Cooper DeJean if they have the ability. How would you say, we talked about Cooper DeJean as a blitzer. We talked about his athleticism. How much did you notice about his ability to cover in that first game against the Browns?
Well, they played a lot of zone.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I'd say
when they blitzed, he was blitzing.
Yeah. Wan'Dale Robinson is the motion receiver in the Giants offense. He's the movable chess piece. Now, the high percentage of his targets end up coming out of the slot. He does line up in the backfield at times, but he's in motion a lot. So you have to have a plan for that. How are you going to respond to when he goes in motion? because he's more and more teams use motion now. And I think, this is one of the things I've been thinking about that I want to talk to coaches about when I get an opportunity. It's hard during the season, obviously, but so many more teams use motion now. And, the way teams used to deal with it, 10, 15 years ago, you got to have a whole different approach now because so many teams do it and it's all different kinds of motions. So you can't just say, okay, let's go to our default defense, cover two. That's too simple now.
True.
Defenses have to start to think, a little more about how they want to deal with this.
I think Adam Vick's in a little bit of a bind here. He blitzed more last week because he could take his chances with Deshaun Watson,
Yes.
not getting the ball to Amari Cooper.
Yeah.
He wants to get exotic and do something different, or the same kind of thing. And you leave Neighbors or you leave Slayton or you leave Wandale against a quarterback who's not great but is playing better than Deshaun Watson, then you might be in trouble. But if you don't blitz, as Greg just said, then you have to have your front four get home, and the Eagles just haven't shown that yet.
Right now, but also I think early on you decide, could you win with your normal pass rush? If you can't beat Zudu at left tackle, then you got to bring a little bit more heat. With DeJean as the add-in defender as a blitzer, yes. Now, but Geoff, I want to get to your point on Cooper DeJean. This is why when you and I talked to clubs before the draft, they did not think he could play outside corner. They thought he'd be better as a nickel. They questioned, because he was an off corner at Iowa, they questioned what his natural position would be at the next level. So let's is he a guy that you want to play at safety? You and I have talked about that months ago. Some teams told us we saw him as a safety or as a nickel, not as an outside corner. Well, he's only played one game, so we don't really know yet. But maybe this is the game, Geoff. Depending on how it goes, we'll see how it plays out. He's got to be in coverage because the Giants, you could say what they want. I know they're not scoring a lot of points. Robinson, Slayton, Neighbors. I know Hyatt never plays, but he can run.
Mm-hmm.
And Theo Johnson from Penn State is a pretty talented kid.
Yeah, yep. Hyatt's been the disappointment. He's not winning. And he doesn't play a ton of snaps. I mean, he's been the disappointment.
One catch so far this season.
Yeah.
In an ideal world for Vic Fangio, and we're probably talking next year if he's still around, right, and the team is reshaped a little bit, I think, and Greg, I'll ask you, I think he would love to be able to have such a reliable four-man rush and a good front six that he can play more of those quarters and two high looks to protect a guy, to then be able to maybe play Cooper DeJean outside corner if he wants to, because he's not worried about one-on-one with no safety help all the time.
Yeah, again, we don't know how they see DeJean down the road, but yes, I mean, there's no question that Vic would like to be able to get, everybody would, because
everybody would, right?
Coverage.
Except Brian Flores, he doesn't care. He'll just throw.
Right. Well, believe it or not, he shows a lot of pressure fronts, but he also rushes three more than anybody in the league. So yeah, so it's but the point is that everybody would love to play with 7 in coverage. Football at its core is a numbers game. That's what it comes down to. You'd love to have 7 versus 5 eligibles as opposed to 6, or 5. I mean, that's what you'd like to have.
Remember, Geoff, what Brian Hoyer told us when he was with Vic in 2016 with Chicago? He said Vic does not want to blitz. He wants to win with 4 men.
Rather not. But
if
you can't impact the quarterback, then you have to.
You have to do 5, sure.
Right. But just to your response, Greg, we were told when they drafted Cooper DeJean that they did have visions of outside corner. Other teams didn't, but the Eagles did at some point. So we'll have to see.
I think in an ideal world, Geoff, your point's correct. It's a good point. In an ideal world, in a Vic Fangio defense, he probably could play corner.
Absolutely. Especially when you have a cover guy like Quinyon Mitchell on the other side. Absolutely. All right, let's turn the page, do what we do, wrap it up, and predict the winner and the MVP.
Oh, I forgot about that part.
Oh, how could you forget?
They're impossible to predict. That's why.
Hey, man, we all hit it right last week. Even though Adam wasn't with us, he assured me he was picking the Eagles to beat the Browns. And even though they skated by, we all got wins.
Go ahead.
Should I go first?
Yes, Greg, you go first.
I'm gonna be a surprise here, I think. Okay. This is based on nothing other than a gut feeling. Okay.
All right. Before you say this, Greg, I just want our audience to know Eagles are 3-point favorites and the total is 42.5 for the overall.
Yeah, I don't even know what that means, but
Go ahead.
I'm going to pick the Eagles to win, and I'm going to pick them to win 24-16. And believe it or not, I'm going to pick Jalen Hurts.
All right.
Oh, is the player of the game?
That's not
Okay.
that crazy. You made it sound like you had some crazy.
Well, I mean, he
prediction.
hasn't played great football, but that's what
True.
I'm going to do.
All right, Adam, we go to you. Who wins? Who's the game MVP?
I'm gonna go Giants 17, Eagles 20.
I knew
Love
that
it.
was coming.
Yeah, I haven't done that.
He thought he was being cute.
Yeah,
Yes, he does this every week.
every now and then. Boy, player of the game. Wow, they got to get Cordell Flat, and I'm going to say Devontae Smith is going to be that guy, not AJ Brown. AJ Brown is the chalk. That's the easy call, but I'm going to take the underdog here, Devontae Smith. My player of the game, who I've rarely picked as player of the game. Skinny Batman is a special football player. We don't talk about him enough. How good of a football player he is. He's great, actually.
Who is this?
He's
Devontae Smith?
Devontae, yeah, great
Devontae
player.
Smith. Great
Really
player. All right, it's funny that you guys both pick low-scoring games and offensive MVPs. You guys are just infatuated with offense like the NFL wants you to be. I am picking the Eagles to also win, so this is bad. We're all picking the Eagles to win, right? 24-20, and I've got a big game for Jalen Carter. He's going to play, and I think he's going to wreak some havoc there in the middle of that line for the New York Giants. So maybe a couple
I
sacks,
almost
forced
picked,
fumble.
by the way.
Go ahead.
I almost picked based on last week because I think he's going to be a factor. I almost picked Grant Calcaterra.
Oh,
Really? That
that's
would
a
have been
good
a nice
one.
little wild card.
Yeah, it's a good
Awesome.
one.
Because he had a big game last week.
He did. That was his best game as
Yeah,
a professional.
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yep.
Nice.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for Inside the Birds pregame show. For Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. Enjoy your football watching and catch us on Inside the Birds postgame live afterward.